Welcome to History in the Highway on West Star Media. Tune us in, turn us up, and tear the knob off, baby. I'm your host, Stan Ellsworth. Pearl Harbor, a name that lives in honor, a date that lives in infamy. December the 7th, 1941. It was then that the Japanese Navy launched a surprise attack on the American fleet at Hawaii. It was a national tragedy. The war that had stretched around the globe was distant thunder no more. It had shown up right on our doorstep. But this day was also a day of national awakening, the dawn of a new age of technology and intelligence, and the true beginning of the American century. Hey, stick with us. We'll be right back after we pay these bills. So how did this happen? Why would the Japanese launch a surprise attack on the American fleet? Heck, we'd been at peace for years. We had been allies. We were negotiating, trying to find a way to keep war from sweeping across the Pacific. And then suddenly this. Well, to understand all the reasons why, you have to go all the way back to Commodore Perry in the 1850s. Remember, Commodore Perry sailed his fleet of American battle cruisers right into Tokyo Bay. The town was known as Edo back then, but he sailed right up to the front door, basically. The Japanese said, "Hey, you got to go." To which Commodore Perry said, "I don't think so. You fellas don't understand. I'm not leaving." And then he commenced shelling the city. The Japanese got the message. They said, "Hey, dude, we didn't understand. Now we get it. Okay, let's cut a deal." And Perry's deal was just this, that from now on, the nation of Japan would trade with the United States as the most favored nation. The Japanese are very quick on the uptake, and they saw that they needed to grow up fast. That they thought they were the big bad guy, but they'd been isolated for literally centuries. But boy, did they catch up. Their economy became industrialized. Their military became industrialized, heavily machined. Their Navy was probably second only to the British Navy. These guys meant business. They got serious, but they also got imperial and colonial. They went to war with the Soviet Union. That's the Russo-Japanese War that Theodore Roosevelt put an end to. They took over Korea as a protectorate and Manchuria as a colony. They ruffled more than a few feathers. And between that World War I, when Japan was our ally, and 1939, things had changed a little bit. See, in 1937, Japan had invaded China. And the barbarity and hostility of that invasion had shocked the world. Not only did the Japanese kill soldiers, they killed women and children as well. They used biological warfare. They would send blankets infected with plague to refugee camps in China. They would gas and bomb and do all manner of horrific things. And both the British and the American governments were horrified. So we placed an embargo on all materials that the Japanese could use to make war. Remember, Japan's an island nation, and she doesn't have a whole lot of natural resources. And that's why she took Korea and Manchuria. It was these two colonies that were meant to supply the Japanese people and military with the raw materials they needed. But as far as rubber, steel, petroleum, oil, they didn't have much of that. And when the British and the United States cut them off, this spelled disaster for Japanese imperial ambition in the Pacific. So the Japanese concocted a plan. They called it the creation of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. What it meant was Japanese Empire from India across the Pacific. Problem was, they had to figure out how to deal with the United States fleet at Pearl Harbor. And that one problem was a really big problem. You know, handling problems is really the name of the game. And one of the problems that we all have this holiday season is finding the perfect gift. Now, sometimes we might not think that an electric toothbrush would be the answer. But I'm going to tell you, the Quip electric toothbrush, it is the answer. It's perfect for everybody that's got a mouth. It's on the top of the list of most of these gift guides. And here's why. The Quip toothbrush uses gentle sonic vibrations, so it doesn't rip up your gums, but it cleans your teeth. You have a sparkly smile and bright, fresh breath. No halitosis, man. That's a big deal. It travels well, so this holiday season, you can take your Quip brush with you wherever you go. You know, Quip makes brushing fast, efficient, easy. It takes the thinking out of the problem. And solving problems, wasn't that what we were talking about? Hey, that's why I love Quip. It's going to make a great gift. Quip is the electric toothbrush that has been approved by the American Dental Association and has received thousands of verified 5-star reviews. It looks like a big-ticket tech item, but Quip starts at just $25. And if you go to getquip.com/HTH right now, you're going to get your first refill pack of bristles free with your electric toothbrush. And you don't have to tell your giftee. It's just kind of a value-added thing. So that's your first refill pack free when you go to getquip.com/HTH. So get you some Quip and get it now. Now, handling that problem was no small issue, and the Japanese put some of their best minds on it. And principal among these was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. This guy was top flight. He'd been educated in the United States, attended Annapolis, Harvard. He'd been all over the country. He understood the industrial and economic might that the United States potentially could bring to bear. And when they asked him to make this plan, he said, all I can do is promise you maybe 12 months. After that, the United States is going to come after us with a big stick and with a big vengeance. But he set to work. And believe it or not, he started working on the plan in January of 1941. Now, the ironic thing is this. Admiral Joseph Grew, he was the United States ambassador to Japan at the time. He wired Washington, D.C. and said, hey, my sources tell me the Japanese are planning an attack on Pearl Harbor. But everybody in D.C. said, nah, you're up in the night. You see, most of the senior military people here in the States, they figured that if the Japanese were going to attack anywhere, they'd attack somewhere closer to home, like the Philippines, not go halfway across the stinking Pacific to bomb the fleet at Pearl. It just didn't make sense to them. It was too far-fetched. See, that was the thinking of the military senior command. I think they were a little out of the loop. But on the other side, it's kind of amazing. You see, the United States Intelligence Service was using a program called MAGIC, and MAGIC had broken the Japanese naval codes. And several of the Japanese admirals had reported to the high command that they feared that their messages were being intercepted. But nobody in Tokyo believed them either. They thought, we thought it up. It's too good. We all say so, so it must be true. So you have the military commanders in America not believing their people on the ground, and you have the military commanders in Tokyo not believing their people on the ground. Boy, this is a recipe for disaster. Well, let's get back to Yamamoto, because this guy, he was pretty solid. He figured the Americans were probably monitoring traffic, and he had to be on his game and assume that they were, and that almost everything that was happening might be known to the Americans. So he was very careful and used radio silence. Only hand couriers were carrying his messages. One of the technological problems that Yamamoto had to overcome was the depth of Pearl Harbor. It's not that deep. So when his torpedo planes would fly over and launch their torpedoes, if he didn't do something about it, these torpedoes would become ineffective. They'd hit bottom and be destroyed. So he had to come up with a way for the torpedo to become more buoyant. Using a lot of common sense, he just figured out, why don't we put wooden fins over the already existing metal fins on our torpedoes? It'll make them much more buoyant. And in fact, it did. It reduced the depth of drop by 16 feet. Instead of hitting at 24, these things only went down to 8 feet. So they were active and dangerous almost the instant they hit the water. Okay, now meanwhile, back at Pearl, there's a new command structure. Admiral Husband Kimmel has just been placed in command of the Navy, and Lieutenant General Walter Short has been placed in command of the Army in the Pacific. Okay, and the first thing these two guys do is review the situation in Hawaii, and they both conclude that, hey, we can't defend this place from pigeons, much less an attack from a foreign power. We need more guys. Uncle Sam deploys more guys. Kimmel and Short both feel that they're still a little short-handed, pardon the pun, but they had to make do with what they had because, again, the guys back in D.C. just didn't believe that there was a credible threat. Gosh, I wonder how many times in history we've said that. But what Kimmel and Short did have were 6 of the best mobile radar stations in the world that were all deployed right there on Oahu. They had our 3 finest carriers stationed there in the Pacific. They had our best battleships, and they had one of the largest submarine fleets in the world, already actively operating out of Pearl Harbor long before the war began. Okay, these guys aren't preparing for an attack by the Japanese. They're preparing their base for defense against anybody, apparently including pigeons. Now, back in Japan, all through the summer, Yamamoto begins training his flight crews and training his ships for this super secret operation. They're going to spend a couple of weeks at sea, and they're going to be out of radio contact. They'll only receive one message. This operation depends on complete surprise. In September, the Japanese High Command requests all the positions of the American ships stationed at Pearl Harbor. Where are they? What's their distance? What's their depth? And they're going to get the information. But while they're exchanging these messages, the super secret American intelligence gathering group called MAGIC breaks the code and knows that the Japanese are now for sure planning an attack on Pearl Harbor. But guess what? Guys back in D.C., they say not a credible threat. And what's funny is one of the Japanese admirals advises the High Command, the Japanese High Command, he's very concerned. He thinks that, hey, our code has been compromised. But the Japanese High Command says, no, not possible. Again, a recipe for disaster. Now, in Washington, D.C., the diplomatic situation is not much better. The poor fellow that's been sent by Japan to the United States to, be the ambassador and do this negotiating, he's been left absolutely in the dark, completely out of the loop. Ambassador Nomura was dealing honestly with his American counterparts, hoping to find a way that the United States and Japan would not go to war. In November, Japan sends a special envoy to help Ambassador Nomura. This envoy is completely up to speed with the duplicity that the Japanese have concocted. On November the 16th, Japanese submarines, the first that will be involved in the attack, depart Japan. And on November the 26th, the aircraft carriers and all their escort ships depart Nagasaki, headed for the Hawaiian Islands. The Japanese want the United States to agree to the expansion in Asia diplomatically. But if those efforts fail, Japan was now completely prepared to go to war. Now, to be fair, at the end of November, Admiral Kimmel and General Short received the so-called war warning from Washington, indicating that a Japanese attack, possibly on an American target in the Pacific, was probably likely. Well, there you go. Politicians who for months now had said neither yes or no had sent these two commanders a very solid maybe. That's a bad place to be in. Admiral Kimmel and General Short were hung out to dry and left on their own. And we'll be right back after we feed the bulldog. Now, some of you guys might be asking yourselves, now wait a minute, why are the Japanese bombing the American fleet at Pearl Harbor? Remember, the whole idea was, after the embargo, when the Japanese couldn't get war material from Britain or the United States, steel, rubber, oil, fuel oil, they had to find it somewhere else. And where they found it was in the Philippines and Southeast Asia. But they knew that the American fleet would stop them if it could, and would be the only force that could turn them back from their imperial aspirations. And they figured that if they thumped us once good and hard, they might not have to thump us again, that we'd be down for the count for at least 12 months, and by then they could solidify their hold on Southeast Asia and across the Pacific, and it would make it too costly for the Americans to make war against them. Now that was their thinking. And on Sunday, December the 7th, 1941, the Japanese would climb Mount Natake. Climb Mount Natake was the secret code that the Japanese had sent to their fleet, telling them attack Pearl Harbor. Attack it Sunday morning, December 7th. At 7:02 in the morning, 2 Army operators on Oahu's northern shore at one of those mobile radar stations detect Japanese aircraft approaching and contact their CO, a junior officer who disregards the reports. He believes they're the big American B-17s that are inbound to help defend the island. Now, the guys at the radar post weren't seeing B-17s. They were seeing the first wave of attack aircraft sweeping over Oahu. At 7:15, the second wave takes off from the Japanese carriers and heads for Pearl. And Pearl Harbor is not on a state of alert. Senior commanders, based on available intelligence, believe there ain't no reason to believe that there's an attack that's imminent. The aircraft have been left parked wingtip to wingtip. Anti-aircraft guns are unmanned. Most of the ammunition boxes are kept locked and in storage. There aren't even any torpedo nets protecting the fleet at anchorage. And since it's Sunday morning, most of the officers and crewmen are leisurely ashore. At 7:53 a.m., the first Japanese assault wave, 51 dive bombers, 40 torpedo bombers, 50 high-level bombers, and 43 escort fighters commenced the attack. Commander Mitsuo Fushida sounds the battle cry, Tora, 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 which is to say, tiger, tiger, tiger. And with that, the Japanese attacked. The American fleet was taken completely by surprise. The first attack wave targeted airfields and battleships. The second wave rolled over the other ships and the shipyard facilities. The air raid lasted until 9:45 a.m. Casualty list included 2,335 servicemen. 68 civilians were killed. 1,178 wounded. Included are 1,104 men entombed aboard the battleship USS Arizona. They died after a almost 2,000-pound air bomb penetrated into the forward magazine and blew up more than 1 million pounds of gunpowder. The American fleet in the Pacific had been badly mauled. Many battleships were damaged, 5 were sunk, many ships were lost, many aircraft. But most importantly, the peace of the American nation had been shattered. There was no going back. The anger of the American nation was visible. Many, many young men ran to volunteer their service. But in no one was it more well seen than the President, Franklin Roosevelt. He stood before a joint session of Congress and demanded that a declaration of war be approved by Congress against the Japanese Empire. In a calm voice that barely betrayed the rage the president felt, Roosevelt said, "The American people, in their righteous might, will win through to the ultimate victory. So help us God." And the American nation went to war. If you like what you're hearing, you'll love what you see. Check out our website, at History in the Highway. And hey, if you want more history with an edge, check out my book on Amazon, Renegades and Rebels. It's a great gift for your history buff. We'll catch y'all further on down the road. This has been History in the Highway on West Star Media.